Welcome everyone. So today's webinar is about new media, and I've called it published, not polished. And there's a reason for that, which we'll get to. And broadly, I want to give you 4 key principles to succeed with new media. And I just want to make the point here, this is not necessarily social media. Social media is very much a part of it, but it's also about other forms of media that we use for communicating in the workplace, with colleagues, with remote workers. So it's media more broadly than just social media. And you'll see the distinction as we go through. So the reason I picked this topic is because the Institute for the Future, when they identified 10 key skills for the future workforce, this was one of them. So they came up with a list of 10 skills, which I'll show you here, and we're going to cover one of them today. So there's a whole bunch of skills there. Some of them are to do with managing information overload, which they call cognitive load management. There's a skill of innovation, which they call novel and adaptive thinking. So sometimes they've given new names for things that we may have come across before. Social intelligence is a lot about EQ, but the interpersonal side of EQ and so on. And one of them, which is the one that we're going to look at today, is the skill of new media literacy. So the Institute for the Future says that we all have to be competent and comfortable with using new forms of media. It doesn't mean we have to know them all, but we have to be comfortable using them and we have to be competent at them. So I'm going to give you today 4 principles of new media versus old media and 3 action steps that you can take to put them into place in your workplace, in your business, and in your professional life in general, and it'll spill over into your personal life as well. So before we start, before we get into those 4 principles, let me run a quick poll here. So the polls are anonymous, and there's one question I'm going to ask you, which is what is your level of new media literacy? And I'm going to ask you to rate yourself from 1 to 5. So 1 is low, 5 is pretty good, like really competent. I reckon there's nobody at a 0 level, so I've started the scale from 1 to 5. And just so you know what I'm talking about when we talk about new media, here are some examples of new media. So if you have a look at that list there, and just think to yourself, how good am I at those things? So we're looking at 2 things here: how comfortable and how competent. So how comfortable are you using these tools, and how competent are you using these tools? Now, you don't have to know all of them, but these are just some of the new media tools and technology that's available to you. So broadly, I'm going to ask you to rate yourself, and we'll run this poll. So let me just open up the poll now. And you'll see that you get the chance, and it's a very simple poll. You just rate yourself from 1 to 5. This is completely anonymous, so nobody sees your ratings. I think I can get to see them, but basically, where do you think you are? And okay, great. People are voting very quickly, so that's really good. Okay, so I generally stop the polling when we get to about 80%, and we've actually got 92% at the moment. So thank you for voting quickly. If anyone wants to get their last vote in now, then feel free to do it. Otherwise, I will share the results now. Okay, so as you can see here, there are most people who are on the average range, and that's great. It's really great because I'm guessing this is a self-selecting group, and that's why you're here for today's webinar. So so whether it's your comfort level or your competency, most people, in fact the vast majority of people, are in the 2 and 3 out of 5. Great. Okay, so good, you're in the right place. So the things, as I said, I want to share with you, and given that we've only got like 25 minutes, I'm not going to go through any of them in detail, but I will share with you 4 principles for understanding the difference between old media and new media. So the 4 things are about what is the difference, and then I've actually got 3 action steps for you to put into practice, which is very much about how. So we're going to do a bit of what and a bit of how in the next 25 minutes. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is for each of the 4, I'm going to show you the old media and the new media idea, and you'll see the principle between them. So the first one, which is one that's probably you would guess if I asked you to identify what some of the principles were, is that old media was very much about text. It's about words on used to be a page, but it's now words on a computer screen. And the new media is very much about multimedia. So it's beyond text. So just to give you some examples of the difference between text and multimedia, and this is not for a poll, it's not for you to necessarily, I'm not going to ask you any questions around it, but I'll just give you some examples just so you can see the difference. And I've grouped these in both areas, small, medium, and large, and you see what I mean. So in the text, in the old media, it's things like email and SMS, so short bits of text. Then you get the longer ones, which are like blogs and newsletters and articles, and then you get into things like full books or procedure manuals in your workplace. So that's very much text-based. The new media version, which is multimedia-based, is where you have instant messenger, but that includes things like video and audio, lots of pictures, so visuals with photos, as well as things like FaceTime and Facebook Live and Snapchat, which again have a lot of video content in them and visual content. And then you have large things like a lot of organizations are using Slack instead of email because those are little communications, but there's a lot of them. And instead of meeting in person, you might be meeting using a video conference, just because that's the way that workplaces look now. So have a look at those. Have a look at. I'm not going to ask you to vote or to comment on those, but have a look and see which of those new media things, in other words, the multimedia things, you're using in your workplace. And if you're not using many of them, then maybe it's time to learn some of them. And towards the end of the webinar, I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so the next one, and as you can see, we're going to go through the principles pretty quickly. At the end of the 4 principles, I'll stop and see if there's any questions, and then we'll get into the 3 actions. So the second principle of getting good with new media is that it used to be all around quality. And now it's very much around quantity. Let me share with you one example of that. So you know that if you go to restaurants now, you see lots of people taking photos of their food. And you may be thinking to yourself, now eat it, don't tweet it. But are you embracing this idea of taking photos of your food and taking photos of your surrounding? So I have a regular lunch date with my partner Nikki's daughter. She's 18. So we meet for lunch every week because she just started uni and we don't get much time to catch up anymore. So we've arranged this regular lunch date, and I was having lunch with her last week, and we ordered food. As soon as the food arrived, first thing she did was take out a phone and take a photo of it. Now Abby is very good with new media, so I'm always curious to know what she's doing. And what she was doing was she was just posting it to Snapchat, to her private group of 10 friends, and that was it. And the way the Snapchat works is it disappears after 24 hours. And it's a very, very different way it's a very, very different goal than I have when I take photos of my surroundings and post it. So the old way of doing stuff like this, and when I say old, it's like in the last 10 years, is that you save the photo, you then edit it and apply some filter to it, post it, and then try to leverage it as much as possible. So I want to post on Facebook, tag people who might be interested, hope that people are going to comment and share it, add a nice little witty comment to it, and then try to get as much leverage from it as possible. If it's a really interesting photo that I can write a blog post around, I'll do that. If it's something that I can then use in a webinar sometime in the future, even better. So that's the old way of doing things. And when I say old, as I said, it's only the last few years, but the new media way of taking photos, which Abby does, is takes the photo, applies a simple filter to it, which just swipes on her phone, posts it, and then forgets about it. So that's it. It doesn't matter whether any of her other group of friends sees it or not. If they happen to see it in the next 24 hours, great. If they don't, then it disappears forever. So she's not obsessed about taking stuff to record it. She's obsessed about taking photos and sharing them to connect. So lots of people think that people on their phones now are connected less, but I actually think they're connected more because they can connect with their friends without having to interrupt them, and their friends can see what's going on in their lives while they're living their own lives as well. So that's what I mean by the difference between quality and quantity. So Abby might be taking photos 20 times a day and posting them and then forgetting about them, whereas I might take one photo and want to get it really beautifully edited, cropped, posted, and leveraged as much as possible. So get into the habit of going for quantity, not necessarily quality. Okay, principle number 3. Principle number 3 is that the old way of doing media, and in fact anything that we create, our intellectual property, is that we own it. So we create it, we automatically get copyright on it, and we want to be the sole sharers of it or sole distributors of it. The new media philosophy is that you share as much as possible. So yeah, lots of people don't preserve the rules of copyright and don't respect those rules. I'm definitely not saying you should break any copyright rules, but be more open to sharing stuff. And the way to do that, if you want to get good at this, is to just become a curator. So become a content curator. And it's like a museum or art gallery curator who picks and chooses the items that they show in a display, in an exhibition, but they haven't dug them out themselves. They haven't necessarily created the art themselves. One of my clients, Kirsten Hodgson in New Zealand, who wrote this book about LinkedIn for lawyers, when she talks about content curation, she encourages her clients to say what you're doing is you're doing their reading for them. So you pick and choose the bits that are relevant for them and then you share. So just be more of a sharer. So I used to do this a lot and this has dropped off because I've become busier and I've resolved now to get back into the habit of sharing at least one interesting thing per day. So that's one of my goals, is to just find something that's worth sharing and just share it. And it's stuff that's published publicly that generally they have a share button. Things like YouTube make it easy to share. So you obviously don't share by breaking any copyright rules, but you do share stuff just as a habit. So make that a habit. Okay, then the last one, and then we stop for questions. So the last one is the last principle is very much applies to people who are business owners or who are in marketing areas. So the old media was very much about commercial. So being commercial, so marketing to generate leads or to generate awareness or to create to even convert leads. So it is very much about generating business as a result of your media. And new media is very much about having conversations. So it's very conversational. So most of what happens on new media is has nothing to do with business. It's personal lives. It's what's going on in your own life. It's what your family and friends are doing. And I find a lot of business owners in particular, but people within organizations as well, they're trying to figure out how can I monetize this. So it's a big challenge in things like in platforms like Instagram and Snapchat. People are trying to figure out how can I make money from this, and that's not the point of it. It's just like if you see people having a conversation on the side of the street, you don't go up to them and interrupt them and try and sell them something. If you see a friend having a conversation with another friend in a cafe, you walk over and you join the conversation. You don't necessarily see them as prospects or suspects or potential referral partners. And this is one of the big challenges that many people have who have grown up with the old media. They're looking at new media and trying to see it the same way. And the word media implies, in their mind, implies that it's distribution with the intent of getting business. And most people who are proficient in new media don't think of it that way. They just think of it as ways of engaging people in conversation. And if you're a leader within an organization, see it the same way as well. So people who are using Facebook or Twitter or the internal versions of them at work, they're not necessarily using it for business purposes. They might just be having a conversation, just as they would if they got up and walked around to the coffee machine and they were having a conversation near the coffee machine. It doesn't mean that they're wasting time. It might be productive time. They're just doing it online rather than in person offline. Okay, so before we get to those 4 actions, before we get to the 3 key actions, let me ask you if there are any questions. So let me show you those 3 things again. Sorry, those 4 principles again. They're on this slide here, and ignore the bottom part of the slide, but the 4 principles are text rather than multimedia rather than text, quantity rather than quality, share rather than own, and conversation rather than commercial. So I just want to stop and just see if there's any questions around any of those things that we've covered so far. Okay, so I'm just waiting to see if anyone's got questions in the question. Oh, here we go. Here's some coming in. Yeah, Anne says, Yeah, I think Anne was talking about media literacy, new media literacy. Mine's very uneven. Some I don't use at all, like Snapchat. And actually, that's right, Anne. So I don't think you should be trying to master all of them. Those, in fact, that list I showed you was just examples of some of the new media tools. Some you may have heard of, some you may not, and that's okay. In fact, when we talk about this, you can see the three actions that are coming up. That we'll talk about that soon, but you don't have to try and master all of them. Yes, as Sandy says, in the past we've heard about the importance of measuring the ROI of social media marketing. Is that relevant in the new way? Yeah, absolutely, Sandy. So, but remember, as I said at the start, new media is not only about social media. I want to broaden this conversation to talk about what are people doing to have conversations now. And new media is not only about outward marketing media. So it can be about people in the workplace communicating with each other on their phone. It could be about families and friends who are doing FaceTime to connect with each other. It could be about people in the workplace, instead of sending an email, they will take a photograph of their screen and send that to somebody using MMS rather than walking over to their desk. So remember, this is not only about social media. And if you are in business and if you need to engage with people in business, then there is a marketing aspect to it as well. But it's the same way as in person. As I said, you don't want to interrupt every conversation you come across. But there's some where it is appropriate to be marketing within some other conversation that's happening. And until we get the basics right, until we know how to converse in new media, then we haven't really earned the right to be commercial. Okay, any other questions? Are blabs part of the new way? I'm not even sure whether blabs exist anymore, but blabs are like video chats or video conferences. So yeah, so any of those things, they're part of new media because they are ways for people to have conversations. And in fact, when blabs first started, and whether you think about blabs or you think about Zoom video conferencing or you think about an online video conference of some other kind, and the ones that work best are those that aren't about marketing. They're about people having a conversation, sometimes a guided conversation, and they attract people to them. Good. Sandy says thank you. Okay, so let's look at these three actions, which you can see on the screen here, but let me go through them now in just a little bit more detail so you can see what I'm talking about for you to get proficient with new media. And remember, the poll said that most people here, I think 80+% of people said they were kind of at level 2 or 3. I reckon there are three things that you should do, three actions that you should take. You saw a summary of them on the previous slide. Let me show you specifically or in a little bit more detail what those are. So the first one is find a mentor, and specifically find a reverse mentor. So Anne Rolfe, who's here on this webinar, is the absolute master, Australia's master in mentoring. So Anne knows very much about what I'm talking about here, but in case you don't, a reverse mentor is the opposite to the traditional kind of mentoring. The traditional mentoring is the older, more experienced, more grey-haired person mentors the younger person. And that is still valuable. It's still very, very important. The reverse mentoring is where you find a mentor who's younger than you are. So somebody who knows about technology, who understands about consumer trends, who understands what Gen Ys and Gen Zs want now from their workplace and their life. So people who have that expertise, and you find them and they become your mentor. So that's one of the reasons. I mean, most of the reason that I hang out with Abby is because I want to make time for her, but also I get a lot of useful advice from her about things like Snapchat. It's really useful to have somebody like that I can ask for advice. So look for a reverse mentor. In fact, I met somebody last week who's Janet Wilson, who's the CEO of Cooper Grace Ward Lawyers in Brisbane, who does exactly this. And she said that she's got a reverse mentor. So she has, I think Janet might even be on this webinar now, she has one of her recent graduates, so somebody who's only been out of uni for a couple of years, who she meets with every 2 or 3 weeks, and she has a conversation with her and asks her about technology, about trends, about what young people are interested in. And I asked Janet for permission to share her story here, and she did, and she kindly said yes, I could do that. And this is what she said to me, that the conversation she has with her mentor, inspirational, sometimes worrying, but always refreshing. And it doesn't have to be very formal, as Janet has said here. You don't have to have a formal mentoring relationship. You don't need your workplace to have some sort of formal mentoring program in place. Find a reverse mentor. In mine, I take my partner's daughter out to lunch every week, and if I get some valuable mentoring advice from that, that's really valuable. Janet does it every couple of 2 or 3 weeks. Find some way that you can do that. And if you've got kids in your house already, especially if you've got teenage kids, well, you're already living with futurists. You should be asking them for advice. That's the first thing. The second one, oh, sorry, before I continue this, so another organization that does that really well is the Hartford. So they've instituted reverse mentoring in their business, and they use it very well. In fact, if you search Hartford Financial Services reverse mentoring, you can even read a report, download and read a report about how successful it's been. And one of the things that they say is that it's great for career advancement for the mentors. Remember, the mentors, the young people, and they said that in their pilot program, most of the mentors got promoted very quickly. So it's not just for you to get value from the younger people, your mentors, but it's for them to advance their career as well. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is to take the time to learn something new. So somebody said to me, when was the last time you did something for the first time? And when we're thinking about a lot of these new media channels, it may be that you have to grit your teeth and just realize that this is something new. It's not something that's evolving from what you already know. So it may be completely new, and it may be pretending that you don't know anything about communication and then figuring out how this new media can help you do that. So, for example, I have taken on board one of the things that I've taken on for myself is to do an online course about taking better selfies. And this is something that I've wanted to do for a while, and I found there's an online course here. It cost me $15, so I've signed up for it, and it has a whole bunch of videos that'll teach me how to take a better selfie. In fact, there's this one unit down here, selfie tips to impress the girls. So I'm looking forward to getting down to that one. But this is something that I know is that I'm not very good at taking selfies. I want to be better at it, just partly out of interest, but partly because it could be useful when I want to post photos of myself. And I'm taking I'm making the effort and setting aside the time to learn that. So what are you going to learn? So what is it that you are going to commit to doing and learn? Now, I should say, don't try and learn it all at once. So my recommendation is, like the selfie course I can learn in a couple of hours. It's like 2.5 hours of video. So I'm guessing it's probably like half a day to a day of my life to do that. Some of these other tools, you may want to put aside a month or maybe 3 months to really get competent at it, especially if it's something that you're going to introduce into your workplace. So if you're going to introduce something like Trello or Slack, which are really common workplace productivity tools, then you may want to say this is going to be a 90-day project. It's going to involve all our team, but at least make the decision to commit to that. And the last one is to make it a habit. So once you decide you're going to commit to it and you decide you're going to learn something new, then it's as with everything, make it a habit so it becomes something that you do automatically rather than something that you do only when you think about it. Like brushing your teeth, you do twice a day regardless of whatever else is going on in your life. So I reckon for habits, look for these 3 things. So set aside time for it, set aside money or other resources for it, and then hang out with the right people. So setting aside time for it may be, like I know Anne Rolfe, who's on the webinar today, she has Marketing Mondays. So Mondays is set aside for marketing. Matt Church recommends that you do one important thing before 8 a.m. I set aside Fridays as my non-client days. Now, other things can impinge on that, but as a rule, that's set aside. For Abby and me to catch up for lunch, we have a rule that Friday lunch is our day that's set aside. If I'm busy or traveling or Abby's busy or she's got uni exams, then of course we don't do that. But as a rule, we've got that time set aside. have you set aside money and resources for that? And are you hanging out with the right people? The reason I'm doing the selfie course is because I run a monthly business book club in Perth with 15 people, and every 3 months we pick a theme. This quarter's theme is about learning, and this month's activity, rather than reading a book, is to actually learn something new and then share the learning experience with the rest of the group. So that's why I'm doing the selfie course. As much as I'm interested, it's also because that's part of the habit of me turning up every month with a bunch of interesting people and choosing to stretch myself. Okay, so those are the four principles of new media success and the 3 actions that I'm going to recommend for you. Can I ask for you to share? Happy to take any questions, but please also, if you would like to share what you're going to take away and do. I'd really love to know, and I'd really like you to share it, and I'll read it out for you in your. I'll read it out for you so that other people know what you're committing to doing as well. So let me just see what people have said. Okay, so Jill says that the word selfie was coined by an Aussie because we can't help ourselves but shorten words. Yeah, great. So Sandy says, ask my 22-year-old son if he'll mentor me. Great, great. Because I think that's really useful, and I often ask audiences, when was the last time you asked a young person for advice? So we often ask them for help, like, can you help me do this? Can you help with this? But when do you actually ask them for advice? Because there is a perception that we're older, wiser, and we know stuff. So we might ask them for assistance, but we really ask them for advice. Yep, the Hartford reverse mentoring, great, Anne. That's particularly relevant for you, I know, but you talk about reverse mentoring as well. Find out what Slack is and how it works, Tony says. Great. So Slack is one of the fastest growing companies in the world. And basically, the quick summary is that it's the alternative to email for things that email's not well suited for, like very short conversations. So email, you go have back and forth conversations where it's just a few lines at a time. Email's not really meant for that, where Slack is. Tricia says use more pictures. Jill says, I have gorgeous uni students who would love to help me. Exactly right, yeah. John says, developing young mentors in progress. Yeah, must encourage that. And some thank yous coming in. David saying, learn to use Slack better. I should say that one of the things I do is I run a membership site, and we tried using Slack for our communication in our little mastermind group in the membership site. And we found it didn't work as something else we were using previously, which was daily emails. So some of these things you try and you find they don't work. So I can't prescribe for you what's going to be perfect for you, but that's the whole point of you committing to something and trying it out, seeing what happens. If it doesn't work, try something else, but at least you're progressing rather than just assuming that, I'm too old to learn this new media stuff, or that you've got somebody else to do it for you. Okay, just see a couple more coming in, so I'll read them out. Yeah, okay, so Janet is here, so thanks Janet. Janet says reverse mentoring is so effective. Yeah, so absolutely right. It's just so powerful and just amazing what you can learn if you're open to the learning and you create the opportunity. Okay, so thank you everyone. Remember that, as I said at the start of the webinar, if you complete the exit survey, I will send you that workbook, which is all of those 10 skills for the future workforce. We covered one of them today, which is about new media literacy, and you get the workbook with all those 10 in there. And the workbook actually has, the reason it's a workbook is it has those 10 areas, and I've broken them down into a little summary of each of the 10 and 5 questions, so self-assessment for yourself as a leader for each of those 10 areas. So you end up with a score out of 50, and it's not the score that matters, but it then helps you identify things for you to work on for yourself and your team. Okay, so if you're watching this live, then you're automatically registered for the webinar series, which means that you'll get the reminders about the next webinar coming up, which is coming up next month, and we're talking about authority and how to stand out. It's about a little bit about personal branding. And if you're watching the recording, then you can go to seeingintothefuture.com and sign up for the webinar series, which is free. Also, if you are watching this and you want to recommend this webinar series to anyone else, please send them to this website as well, seeingintothefuture.com. So thank you everyone for coming along. I really enjoyed presenting this because I've talked in the past a lot about media and particularly about social media, but I really did want to broaden the conversation to talk about new media in general. And I just come back to the point that I was making earlier, that really learn the foundations of communicating in new media so that then you earn the right to then market using things like social media. Thanks everyone. Have a great month, and bye for now.